Dragon-proud longships once darkened the horizon, carrying not just warriors, but an entire civilization on the move. This was the Viking Age, a 300-year explosion of expansion that redrew the map of the medieval world. By the end of this story, you will see the Vikings not as simple raiders, but as the architects of a connected world whose legacy lives on in our language, our cities, and our very imagination. How did farmers from the remote north forge trade routes to the glittering palaces of Baghdad? And why did they risk everything to sail into an empty ocean centuries before Columbus? What does it truly mean to leave your mark on the world? A bitter wind whipped across the deck, stinging the faces of men, women, and children huddled together for warmth. This was no simple raiding party, but a migration, a desperate gamble on the open sea. The Viking Age was born not from a single event, but from a perfect storm of pressures that made staying home a greater risk than leaving. Scandinavia's geography offered little room to grow, with its deep fjords and steep mountains leaving only thin strips of fertile land. As families grew, this land became impossibly cramped, creating a generation with no inheritance and no future. At the same time, power was consolidating. Ambitious kings were unifying regions, pushing out smaller chieftains who refused to bow down. These displaced leaders now saw opportunity across the water, where wealth and prestige awaited those brave enough to take it. But what good is ambition without the means to act? Historian Anders Winroth points to a single, pivotal invention that turned this simmering pressure into explosive action: the clinker-built longship. Unlike the deep, heavy vessels of other European powers, these ships were masterpieces of flexibility and lightweight, constructed with overlapping planks that allowed them to dance over waves rather than fight through them. Their shallow draft meant they could sail up rivers and land directly on beaches, transforming any coastline into a potential doorstep. This technological leap provided the key. It was the ultimate tool that unlocked the pressures at home, turning internal strife into external expansion. Faced with shrinking prospects on their own farms, would you not also look to the horizon? For thousands, the answer was a given, setting a course that would soon bring them to the undefended shores of a peaceful monastery and into the written history of a terrified Europe. A world away from the cramped fjords of the north, the monks of Lindisfarne went about their sacred routines. The holy island was a sanctuary of prayer and priceless manuscripts, a place where the only sounds were chanting and the cry of gulls. Then, on a day in 793, strange dragon-proud shapes emerged from the sea mist. The attack was swift and merciless. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle would later call it a forewarning of dire calamity, and they were right. This was not a random act of violence. It was a perfectly calculated business decision. The Vikings had identified a target brimming with gold, silver, and jeweled relics, yet it was completely undefended. They applied their tactical brilliance, using speed and surprise to maximum effect. While the physical loot was immense, the psychological plunder was far greater. The raid shattered an entire continent's sense of security. If a holy place like Lindisfarne was not safe, then no coastal community from Ireland to Francia could rest easy. This single event was the opening gambit that announced the Vikings to a terrified Europe. Its success proved a devastatingly effective model, a blueprint that would encourage countless expeditions. But this was only the beginning. The same daring that fueled these raids would soon push them beyond mere plunder toward something far more ambitious: the establishment of permanent footholds on foreign soil. That same shipyard, blanketed in winter snow, was where the Vikings' greatest advantage was forged, plank by overlapping plank. This was the longship, a vessel so perfectly adapted to its purpose it became an extension of the Norse soul. Its revolutionary construction method, known as clinker building, involved crafting a hull from overlapping planks riveted together. This created a hull that was incredibly strong yet flexible, allowing the ship to bend and twist with the ocean's power rather than shatter against it. Picture a vast, open ocean wave. A rigid ship fights it, a stressful and dangerous battle, but a longship would simply ride over it, its flexible frame absorbing the shock. This was a ship designed to dance with the sea, not conquer it. Its symmetry was another stroke of genius. With a bow and stern that were virtually identical and a shallow keel, the ship could land on any beach without needing to turn around. It could be rowed up a narrow river and then, if pursued, rowed back out again with the same ease. Retreat was as simple as advance, making Viking fleets incredibly elusive and tactically brilliant. Maritime expert Gareth Williams emphasizes these ships were far more than simple transport. They were expressions of Viking society itself. Different ships served different roles in their expanding world. The massive drakkar, or dragon ship, with its fearsome carved prow and rows of benches for warriors, was built for speed and intimidation. In contrast, the broader, deeper-bellied gnar was the workhorse of trade and settlement, designed to carry families, livestock, and cargo across the North Atlantic. This unparalleled maritime technology was the physical key that unlocked the entire world for them. It was the engine of every raid, the vehicle for every migration, and the home for every daring explorer staring into an unknown horizon. And with this ultimate tool in their hands, they would soon push beyond the familiar coasts of Europe, venturing into a vast and empty ocean where myth and reality blurred into one. The vast grey Atlantic stretched in every direction, an endless plain of water under an empty sky. For the crews aboard these small wooden ships, every league westward was a step into a void. They sailed without maps, guided only by the sun's path, the positions of familiar stars, and the crucial flight patterns of seabirds returning to land. This westward expansion was not a single voyage, but a slow, deliberate crawl across the ocean, using islands as stepping stones. First came the Orkneys and Shetlands, then the remote Faroe Islands, each new landfall offering a brief respite before the horizon called again. It was a journey driven as much by necessity as by courage. Some were explorers, hungry for discovery, while others were exiles, cast out from their homelands and forced to seek a new life beyond the known world. The search for new grazing land and resources for their animals pushed them ever onward. Then, a Viking named Nadod, blown off course by a storm, sighted a massive, snow-covered coastline. Later, Garðar Sverrisson circumnavigated this new land, naming it Garðar Sjómi. We know it today as Iceland, a land of fire and ice where glaciers met volcanic plains. The settlement that followed was meticulously recorded in the Landnámabók, the Book of Settlements. This remarkable text describes how families claimed land by carrying a ceremonial fire around its boundaries, establishing farms in a landscape both beautiful and harsh. This was not a lawless frontier. The settlers soon founded the Althing, one of the world's oldest parliamentary assemblies, where free men would gather to debate laws and settle disputes in the shadow of a great rift valley. This proved the Vikings were not just passing through, they were building a new society, adapting their old ways to an entirely new world. Yet for some, even this incredible new land was not enough. The most restless of them would soon hear whispers of another shore, a green land even further west, a discovery that would test the very limits of their world. Leif Erikson stood on a shore his people had never seen, in a world their maps did not contain. The sagas tell us his crew was struck by the abundance of this new land, a place so rich with wild grapes they named it Vinland. This was not a fleeting glimpse, but a deliberate effort to establish a foothold. According to the saga of the Greenlanders, the first sighting came from a merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson, who was blown off course and saw a wooded coast but did not land. It was Leif who later bought Bjarni's ship and retraced that accidental route, determined to explore. He and his crew did not just find grapes, they found towering timber, a resource desperately scarce in their Greenland home. They built temporary shelters, spending a winter in a place of startling mildness before returning with a cargo of wood and stories that would fuel the dreams of generations. For centuries, these accounts lived only in the pages of the Icelandic sagas, epic tales blending history and legend. Then, in the 1960s, a Norwegian explorer named Helge Ingstad and his wife, archaeologist Anne Stein Ingstad, made a discovery that turned legend into fact. On the northern tip of Newfoundland, at a place called Elance Ox Meadows, they uncovered the remains of a Norse settlement. Here were the foundations of sturdy turf-walled buildings, a forge for smithing iron, and a bronze cloak pin, identical to those found in Scandinavia. This was not a random camp, but a strategic base camp, a place to overwinter and repair ships before launching further explorations down the coast. It proves, beyond any doubt, that Norse feet walked on North American soil around the year 1000, a full 5 centuries before Columbus. Yet this incredible achievement was ultimately fleeting. The settlement at Elance Ox Meadows was abandoned after only a few years. Why did this bold venture not become a new Iceland or Greenland? The sagas point to 2 overwhelming challenges. The first was conflict with the indigenous peoples the Norse called Skraelings, a term likely referring to the Beothuk or Thule ancestors. These encounters, initially centered on trade, quickly turned violent. The Norse, with their metal weapons and chainmail, were not prepared for the swift, guerrilla-style tactics of the native peoples, who could arrive in great numbers in their skin boats. The second, and perhaps greater, challenge was simple logistics. Vinland was simply too far from the established Norse centers in Greenland and Iceland. Supplying a permanent colony across such a vast and treacherous ocean stretch was a logistical nightmare they could not overcome. So the dream of a Western settlement faded, but the brief Norse presence in North America remains one of history's most monumental feats of exploration. It was the absolute pinnacle of their westward expansion, a testament to their unmatched seafaring courage. And while their ships turned back from the American coast, their ambition was flowing just as powerfully in the opposite direction, toward the rising sun. A parallel push to the east was already underway, carrying them deep into the river systems of Russia, where they would forge a very different kind of empire, one built not on settlement but on silver and slaves. While Leif Erikson's crew marveled at the wild grapes of North America, another Viking was poling his laden ship down a very different kind of waterway. He was a Swedish trader, and his route was not the open ocean but the winding, forest-lined Volga River. His cargo was the wealth of the north, bundles of luxurious furs, chunks of golden amber, and human captives bound for distant markets. This was the Ostavega, the Eastern Way, a sprawling network of rivers that carried the Norse deep into the heart of lands we now call Russia and Ukraine. Here they were known by a new name, the Rus, a people who would give their name to a future empire. They were not mere raiders in the east, but pioneers of commerce, building a trade bridge between 2 worlds. To establish their presence, they founded key settlements at strategic points along the rivers. Places like Staraya Ladoga and Novgorod began as simple trading posts. little more than fortified clearings where goods could be stored and ships repaired. But they grew into powerful towns, the seeds of great Russian cities. The Rus were the ultimate middlemen. From the vast northern forests, they brought furs so prized they were used as currency. From the Baltic shores, they carried amber, the gold of the north, and in a grim but booming trade, they captured or purchased slaves from Slavic tribes to feed the immense demand of the Abbasid Caliphate. In return, they sought one thing above all: silver. The Islamic world's silver dirhams flowed north by the millions, a river of currency that reshaped the Scandinavian economy. We know this trade in intimate detail thanks to travelers like the Arab diplomat Ibn Fadlan, who encountered a band of Rus traders on the Volga in the 10th century. He described them as tall, statuesque people, tattooed from neck to fingernails, with astonishing hygiene rituals and a fierce devotion to their gods. He was both fascinated and appalled by their customs, leaving a priceless eyewitness account of their daily lives. The most ambitious of these Rus traders did not stop at the Caspian Sea. Some ventured further, all the way to the legendary city of Constantinople, which they called Miklagard, the Great City. The sight of its massive walls and golden domes must have been as staggering to them as Vinland's shores were to Leif Erikson. Their reputation as fearsome warriors was so great that the Byzantine emperors began recruiting them as their personal bodyguards, the famed Varangian Guard. These Norse axemen became the emperor's elite protectors, a symbol of immense trust and a testament to their martial prowess far from home. This eastern expansion created a cultural and economic bridge that connected the fjords of Scandinavia to the bustling markets of Baghdad and the splendor of Byzantium. But such lucrative trade routes were tempting targets, and protecting them required more than just commercial skill. It demanded a unique and brutally adaptable form of warfare, one that could dominate both river and land. That Rus trader on the Volga knew his silver was only safe if he could defend it. The popular image of a Viking warrior is a chaos of furs and fury, a screaming berserker lost in a trance of battle. The reality was far more calculating and far more effective. While individual ferocity was certainly respected, Viking warfare was a disciplined craft, built on strategic flexibility and the deliberate use of psychological terror. Their entire approach was ruthlessly pragmatic. They would avoid a fair fight whenever possible, preferring to raid a lightly defended monastery one week, then use their ships to outmaneuver a local army the next. If a target was too well defended for a quick assault, they were perfectly capable of settling in for a long and grinding siege, as they famously did at Paris. The true backbone of their military power was not the legendary berserker, but the well-armed bondi, the free farmer who could afford a spear, a shield, and a coat of mail. These men fought not as a disorganized mob, but in the tight, interlocking shield wall, a formation that required immense discipline and trust. Each man's shield protected his neighbor, creating a moving fortress of wood and iron. Historian Philip Line points out that their greatest advantage was not brute strength, but mobility and the element of surprise. Their longships were the key, acting as medieval landing craft that could deposit a fully armed force dozens of miles up a river, striking at the heart of a kingdom before any warning could be sent. Their weaponry reflected this versatility. While the double-edged sword was a prized status symbol, it was the axe that was the true workhorse of battle, with the massive Danex capable of shearing through shields and armor. Warfare was never the final goal. It was simply the sharpest tool in their kit, the means to clear the way for their true ambition. Once a region was subdued and its defenses broken, the real work of building a new home could begin. The same ambition that carved trade routes through Russia demanded a more permanent prize in England. a vast fleet, which the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle called the Great Heathen Army, landed on England's shores in the year 865. This was no summer raiding party. It was a force of thousands intent on conquest. For over a decade, this army campaigned across the kingdoms of Northumbria, Mercia, and East Anglia, exploiting political divisions and shattering local resistance. The evidence of their violent arrival is etched into the earth itself. At Repton, a mass grave holds the remains of nearly 300 individuals, many with terrible battle injuries, buried around a central chamber for a Viking king. This was the brutal cost of forging a new homeland. The turning point came after a series of fierce battles with Alfred, the King of Wessex. Exhausted by war, the Viking leader Guthrum and Alfred met to negotiate the Treaty of Wedmore in 878. This agreement formally partitioned England. Alfred kept the southern and western lands of Wessex, while Guthrum and his followers received a vast territory in the northeast, a region that would become known as the Danelaw, for it was here that Danish law held sway. This was the ultimate evolution, the shift from raider to settled ruler. The Danelaw was not a single, unified kingdom, but a patchwork of independent jarldoms, each ruled by a powerful Norse chieftain. These new lords did not merely occupy the land, they transformed it. They introduced new agricultural methods and reshaped the very map. To this day, you can trace the borders of the Danelaw by looking at a map of England. Thousands of place names ending in by, like Derby or Whitby, and Thorpe, like Scunthorpe, are Norse words for village and farm, marking settlements founded by these Scandinavian newcomers. They brought their own legal customs, which often placed a higher value on personal freedom and a different system of fines, profoundly influencing English common law. The Danelaw stands as a powerful testament to a new Viking strategy. It was a model of conquest and assimilation where warriors became farmers and invaders over generations became neighbors. This same blueprint for building a new society, adapted to local conditions, was being applied with equal force in a very different landscape, on the shores of a kingdom they would name for themselves. While the Danelaw was taking root in England, a similar story of transformation was unfolding across the English Channel. In the year 911, the Viking chieftain Rollo stood before Charles the Simple, the King of West Francia. This was not a scene of total surrender. It was a tense negotiation, a pragmatic deal between a weary king and a powerful sea lord. The agreement they struck would change the course of European history. In exchange for swearing a nominal fealty to the Frankish crown, converting to Christianity, and most importantly, defending the Seine River from other Viking raiders, Rollo and his Norse followers were granted a substantial territory. This land, soon to be known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen, was their new home. This was a brilliant diplomatic solution, turning a relentless predator into a loyal guard dog for the kingdom's most vulnerable flank. The Normans, as this new hybrid people called themselves, did something remarkable. They did not cling stubbornly to their old ways. They embraced Frankish culture with astonishing speed, adopting the local Romance language, integrating into the complex feudal system, and building castles that would become the backbone of medieval warfare. Yet they never lost the core Viking traits that defined them: their relentless ambition, their mastery of ships, and their willingness to cross oceans for opportunity. This potent fusion of Norse vigor and Frankish structure created a powerhouse. Within just a few generations, these descendants of Vikings looked not like Scandinavian raiders, but like French nobles. And one of them, Duke William, would harness this inherited daring for an audacious project. He built a massive invasion fleet, not of classic longships, but of deeper vessels designed to carry thousands of men and horses across the Channel. In 1066, he launched his assault on England, culminating in the Battle of Hastings and his coronation as William the Conqueror. The settlement of Normandy stands as the ultimate proof of Viking political genius. It was more than just finding a new home. It was a masterclass in adaptation, where invaders so thoroughly reinvented themselves that they went on to conquer a kingdom. And as William secured his English throne, other Norse descendants were carving out kingdoms of their own in a far more unlikely place, under the relentless Mediterranean sun. The smoky air of Dyflin was a thick tapestry of languages, where the guttural Norse of a ship captain mingled with the lyrical Gaelic of a local farmer and the precise Arabic of a merchant from Andalusia. This was 10th century Dublin, a bustling Viking port that had become one of the most cosmopolitan hubs in the North Atlantic. The Viking relationship with Ireland was a complex dance of the axe and the arm ring, swinging between brutal raids and deep, symbiotic partnerships. Their greatest legacy here was not just plunder, but the very concept of the city. Before their arrival, Ireland was a land of monasteries and scattered royal forts. The Norse established the first true urban centers at Dublin, Waterford, Wexford, and Limerick, choosing strategic river mouths that transformed the island into a new nexus of international trade. These were not simple military encampments. They were thriving, organized market towns humming with specialized crafts. Copper makers, amber workers, and comb makers plied their trades in workshops that lined wood-paved streets, their refuse creating a rich archaeological record of daily life. These towns grew so wealthy and autonomous they began minting their own silver coins, a powerful statement of economic sovereignty stamped with the names of Norse kings. This urban revolution created a new economic landscape, pulling Ireland into trade networks that stretched from the frozen north to the Silk Road. The political reality was equally intricate. Norse leaders like Olaf the White and Ivar the Boneless were not just warlords, they were savvy players in the fractured world of Irish kingship. They fought ferocious battles against high kings, but just as often they formed shifting alliances, intermarried with Gaelic noble families, and became irrevocably enmeshed in local power struggles. A Norse king might lead his warband alongside an Irish ally one season, only to be besieged by him the next. This constant interplay of conflict and cooperation forged a unique Hiberno-Norse culture, a blend that left an indelible mark on Ireland's destiny. The very streets of modern Dublin still follow the curves of the Old Norse town, a permanent echo of the urban revolution they began. While some of their kin were building these lasting towns, others were mastering an even wider stage, becoming the master merchants of the North Sea. A Norse merchant in a Dublin market might have paid for his goods with a silver coin minted in Samarkand. His world was not a collection of isolated villages, but a web of connections spanning continents. The reach of a single Viking trader could extend from the walrus hunting grounds of Greenland to the bustling markets of Baghdad, a global network operating centuries before the term existed. This economic machine ran on three major trade arteries, each with its own unique cargo. The western route, reaching across the North Sea to the British Isles and the Atlantic Islands, was a conduit for luxury goods. From the remote north came walrus ivory, a precious commodity carved into exquisite chess pieces and religious objects for European elites. Sturdy Norse woolens, prized for their quality, were traded alongside a grim but profitable cargo of slaves, often captured in raids on Ireland and Scotland. This route fueled the growth of towns like Dublin and York, turning them into commercial powerhouses. Meanwhile, the eastern route, as we have seen, channeled the wealth of the northern forests south. Vast quantities of furs from sable to fox, along with golden Baltic amber, were shipped down the Russian rivers. In exchange, the Islamic world's silver dirhams flowed north in a seemingly endless stream. Hoards containing tens of thousands of these coins, buried for safekeeping, have been unearthed across Scandinavia, silent testimony to the immense scale of this trade. Completing this triangle was the southern route, connecting the Norse to Francia and the heart of continental Europe. Here, they acquired the sophisticated manufactured goods their own lands could not produce. Fine Frankish swords, gleaming glassware, and barrels of wine were loaded onto their ships, items that signaled status and refinement back home. This was no haphazard barter system. The Vikings operated a sophisticated economy using standardized weights, often found in merchant graves, to ensure fair trade across cultures. They even used early forms of credit, where a merchant's spoken word and reputation could stand in for immediate payment. This intricate web of commerce was the true lifeblood of their expansion, financing the ships, the armies, and the settlements. But such a complex economic machine could not run on silver alone. It demanded a social structure capable of organizing thousands of people, from the lowliest thrall to the most powerful jarl, into a cohesive and dynamic force. The wealth flowing from global trade needed a social structure to manage it, a hierarchy as rigid and functional as the overlapping planks of a longship. At the top stood the jarls, the aristocratic class who owned the largest farms and the finest ships. Their wealth was measured in land, silver, and loyal followers. A jarl's hall was the heart of his power, a place where he feasted his warriors, planned expeditions, and distributed gifts to secure their allegiance. This reciprocal relationship was the glue of Norse society. A jarl provided leadership, opportunity, and spoils. In return, his men offered their swords and their loyalty. It was these jarls, ambitious and resource-rich, who often funded the great voyages of exploration and the massive raiding armies, risking their wealth for even greater prestige and power. Below them were the carls, the free farmers and craftsmen who formed the true backbone of the Viking world. This was not a peasant class in the European sense. A carl owned his own land, his weapons, and had a voice in his community. He could be a farmer one season and a warrior on a jarl's expedition the next, using his share of the plunder to improve his farm or elevate his status. The skills of carls were diverse and essential. They were the shipwrights who built the longships, the blacksmiths who forged the swords and axes, and the merchants who navigated the trade routes. Their collective labor and martial prowess made the entire enterprise of expansion possible. A successful carl, through bravery in battle or shrewdness in trade, could amass enough wealth and followers to become a jarl himself, a rare but powerful motivator in a society that valued personal achievement above all else. At the bottom of this structure were the thralls, slaves who provided the brute labor that sustained the economy. Thralls were typically prisoners of war, captives from raids on foreign shores, or sometimes individuals enslaved due to debt. They had no rights and were considered the property of their master. A thrall's life was one of hard labor, from working fields and tending livestock to performing the most grueling tasks in a jarl's household. Yet their status, while bleak, was not always a permanent sentence. A master could choose to free a thrall, or a thrall might save enough to purchase their own freedom, eventually integrating into the class of carls. This potential for social mobility, however limited, was a crucial pressure valve within an otherwise strict hierarchy. This entire social engine was regulated by the Thing, the regional assembly where all free men could gather to debate laws, settle disputes, and make decisions for the community. The Thing was not a democracy in the modern sense, as the influence of powerful jarls was always felt, but it was a remarkably participatory system. Here, a carl could bring a lawsuit against a jarl, and the case would be decided by a jury of his peers. This commitment to a form of public justice and collective decision-making prevented power from becoming entirely despotic and provided a stable framework for society, even in far-flung settlements like Iceland. It was this combination, a rigid hierarchy that still allowed for personal advancement and a system of law that gave freemen a voice, that generated the relentless, ambitious energy driving their ships to every corner of the known world. But what belief system justified this relentless pursuit of wealth and status, and what gods did they fear when the storm winds began to howl? The gods of the Norse did not watch from a distant, serene heaven. They lived in a cosmos of constant struggle, a sprawling universe held together by the great ash tree Yggdrasil, whose roots and branches connected 9 separate worlds. This was not a religion of quiet contemplation, but a divine drama of conflict, wisdom, and inevitable doom that mirrored the Viking spirit itself. At the center of this drama was Odin, the one-eyed All-Father, a god who sacrificed his own eye for a drink from the well of wisdom and hung himself on the world tree for 9 nights to discover the secret of the runes. He was the god of poetry and the dead, of war and knowledge, a relentless seeker who gathered the souls of the finest warriors slain in battle. These chosen few were brought to his great hall, Valhalla, not for an eternity of peace, but for a daily cycle of combat and feasting. They would fight each other to the death each day, only to be resurrected each evening to feast on endless boar and mead, all in preparation for the final battle. This ultimate destiny was Ragnarok, a prophesied twilight of the gods where the cosmos would be consumed in fire and flood, and even Odin and Thor would fall in combat against the forces of chaos. This belief made a warrior's death not a tragedy to be feared, but a glorious entry into the ultimate training camp for the end of the world. Alongside Odin stood his son Thor, the thunder god, who was arguably more popular with the common man. Thor was the steadfast protector of humanity and the gods, wielding his mighty hammer Mjolnir against the giants who threatened the ordered worlds. His adventures, chronicled in the myths, were tales of colossal strength, immense appetites, and journeys into the unknown, directly reflecting the real-world experiences of Viking explorers and traders facing foreign lands and peoples. These deities were not perfect moral examples. They were scheming, passionate, and deeply flawed, making them relatable figures whose stories explain the chaos and beauty of the world. Why sail into an empty ocean or raid a fortified coast? Because a life of daring action offered the only chance for a glory that would echo through the ages, even unto the end of time. This entire worldview, preserved for us in the Poetic Edda and the later Prose Edda by Snorri Sturluson, is saturated with the themes of their expansion. The myths are filled with voyages to strange lands, encounters with monstrous beings, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge and treasure. Yet this robust and ancient belief system, which had fueled their expansion for centuries, was not destined to last forever. A new, powerful influence was already moving north, carried not by raiders but by missionaries and kings, and it promised a very different kind of kingdom. A king's political ambition can reshape an entire people's relationship with the divine. The old gods of Asgard, with their feuds and fatalism, were deeply woven into the fabric of Norse life, but a new force was steadily moving north, carried not by longships but by missionaries, diplomats, and the pragmatic calculations of kings. The conversion of the Vikings to Christianity was rarely a story of sudden, heartfelt revelation. It was a slow, deliberate, and often top-down process where faith became a powerful tool of statecraft. Ambitious rulers like Harald Bluetooth in Denmark and Olaf Tryggvason in Norway saw in Christianity a path to greater authority. By embracing the new god, they could centralize power, sidelining local chieftains whose influence was tied to the old pagan cults. More importantly, it granted them legitimacy and acceptance within the exclusive club of Christian European monarchs, opening doors for vital alliances and lucrative trade. The evidence of this political masterstroke stands in a churchyard in Jelling, Denmark. A massive runic stone raised by Harald Bluetooth bears a proud proclamation. It states that Harald unified all of Denmark and converted the Danes to Christianity. Here, the spiritual and the political are literally carved from the same stone, a permanent monument to a king's power. Yet for the average farmer or warrior, this official change was not an instant transformation of the heart. For generations, people practiced a cautious, blended faith. Archaeologists find graves where a person is buried in a Christian manner, east to west, yet still clutching a tiny amulet of Thor's hammer for protection. They were hedging their bets, honoring the new god while keeping the old ones close, just in case. This syncretic period reveals a deeply practical people navigating a profound cultural shift. The long-term consequences of this religious realignment were immense. By joining the Latin Christian world, Scandinavia gained access to a continent-wide network of diplomacy. Kings could now arrange marriages with other royal houses, securing their borders and their dynasties. The Church brought with it the technology of writing, using the Roman alphabet to record laws and histories, something the runic script was seldom used for. It also, quite pointedly, began to curb the Viking appetite for raiding wealthy monasteries, as attacking fellow Christians became a much more complicated political and spiritual act. This integration into mainstream medieval Europe marked the beginning of the end for the classic Viking Age. The independent, pagan sea rovers were gradually transforming into Christian kings and feudal lords. And nowhere is this complex fusion of old and new worlds more beautifully, or more paradoxically, captured than in the art they left behind. A master carver's chisel did not simply decorate wood, it unleashed a writhing, serpentine world into being. Viking artistry was a language in itself, a complex visual poetry where every coiled limb and interlacing tendril spoke of power, belief, and a connection to a living, breathing universe. This was not art for a gallery, but for life itself, transforming the prow of a longship, the curve of a sleigh, or the surface of a simple antler comb into a canvas of profound meaning. Scholars trace the evolution of this unique aesthetic through a series of distinct styles, each with its own character. It begins with the gripping beast motif, a creature so named because its paws clutch frantically at its own body and the borders of the artwork, a powerful, almost chaotic expression of raw energy. This evolved into the more orderly, ribbon-like animals of the Jelling style, often seen symmetrically entwined, and then into the lush, foliate-decorated creatures of the Mammon and Ringerike periods. The final flowering of this tradition is the urn style, a masterpiece of elegant minimalism where sleek, predatory animals coil in a single, fluid line of incredible sophistication. Nowhere is this breathtaking craftsmanship more fully realized than in the Oseberg ship burial. This royal grave, unearthed in Norway, was a time capsule of 9th century art, its ceremonial wagon, sledges, and the ship itself carved with a riot of gripping beasts and intricate patterns. This was a mobile court, every functional object elevated to a statement of divine right and immense wealth. But this artistic language was not spoken in isolation. As the Vikings traveled, they absorbed influences like sponges, the intricate knotwork of Celtic metalwork, the classicizing acanthus leaves of Carolingian art, and the formal elegance of Byzantine silks all found their way into the Norse visual vocabulary, were broken down, and were reassembled into something entirely new and distinctly Viking. This artistry was a badge of identity, a way to show you were connected to a wider, more sophisticated world. And just as they developed a unique way of carving, they forged an equally unique way of writing, one where every stroke was believed to hold a fragment of cosmic power. A runestone stands silent in a field, its surface etched with angular, cryptic letters. These are runes, the written voice of the Viking Age, an alphabet known as the Futhark. Unlike the flowing script of medieval monks, runes were designed for the practical world, carved with a knife into wood, bone, or stone. Each character was more than a letter. It was a symbol believed to hold inherent power. The rune master who carved them was not just a scribe, but a practitioner of a deep and mysterious craft. A simple inscription on a stick might mark its owner, while a rune carved on a grave slab could summon magical protection for the dead. The most famous of all are the Jelling stones in Denmark, massive royal monuments where King Harald Bluetooth proclaimed his great deeds for all eternity, uniting the political and the spiritual in solid rock. But if runes offer us brief, monumental whispers, the Icelandic sagas are a roaring chorus. Written down on calfskin in the 13th century, long after the events they describe, these epic prose narratives are the true treasure chest of the Norse soul. They are not dry histories, but sprawling family dramas filled with complex characters, bitter blood feuds, daring voyages, and intricate legal battles. In the pages of Egil's saga, we meet a man of terrifying contradictions, a brutal warrior who is also a sublime poet, his skull seething with a volatile temper. Egil's saga pulls us into a devastating cycle of revenge, where honor demands violence and legal cunning is as potent a weapon as any axe. These stories preserve the cultural memory of the great settlements in Iceland and Greenland, and even the fleeting venture to Vinland, giving names and motives to the shadows of history. While we must read them as literature, not strict fact, they offer an unparalleled window into the Viking mindset, a world governed by a rigid code where a single insult could unravel generations of peace. This literary legacy, from the magical whisper of a single rune to the epic sweep of a saga, allows us to hear their voices across the centuries, and those voices did not fade away. They seeped into the very languages we speak today, leaving a permanent mark on our modern map. That runestone in Jelling speaks a royal language of power, but the most profound Viking legacy is whispered in the words you use every single day. Listen closely to modern English, and you will hear the echoes of the Danelaw, the sound of two cultures colliding and merging into one. The extensive daily contact between Old English and Old Norse speakers led to a massive practical infusion of vocabulary. Think of the most fundamental parts of life. The sky above your head, the skin on your body, the egg you eat for breakfast, the knife you use to cut your food. These are not Latin or ancient Greek terms, they are pure Old Norse. Your window, your husband, even the law of the land, all came from the language of the settlers. This borrowing was possible because the two tongues were cousins, both descended from a common Germanic root. While not identical, they were similar enough for basic communication, a linguistic bridge that allowed for a remarkable fusion. This exchange went beyond simple nouns. It streamlined English itself. Old English had a complex system of grammatical gender, where objects were arbitrarily masculine, feminine, or neuter. The constant, messy interaction with Norse speakers who used a different gender system helped to scrub this complexity away. Even more significantly, we owe one of our most useful pronouns to this contact. Old English lacked a good, gender-neutral plural for people. The Norse settlers brought with them the words they, them, and their, filling a crucial gap and simplifying communication in a mixed society. You can still walk through the landscape of northern and eastern England and see this history written on the map. Towns whose names end in by, like Derby or Whitby, mark a Norse farm or village. The suffix thorp, as in Scunthorpe, denotes a secondary settlement, and thwaite, found in Braithwaite, comes from the Norse word for a forest clearing or meadow. These names are not just labels, they are living monuments, the deeds to land claimed and cultivated by Scandinavian families over 1,000 years ago. This deep linguistic fusion is one of the most direct and enduring proofs of Viking influence. It was not a superficial layer of raiding jargon, but a fundamental rewiring of the English language at its most common, everyday level, forever linking the story of England to the story of the North. The very forces of expansion that defined the Viking Age ultimately forged the kingdoms that would end it. The immense wealth flowing back to Scandinavia from raids, trade, and settlements did not simply enrich individual chieftains, it created the means for unprecedented political centralization. For centuries, power had been a local affair, resting in the hands of independent jarls who commanded their own ships and loyal followers. Now, ambitious kings harnessed this new wealth to build something far larger, a national identity. In Norway, Harald Fairhair is legendary for his brutal campaign to subdue the regional chieftains, a project fueled by the riches and ambitions he gathered from overseas. His victory at the Battle of Hafrsfjord around the year 872 is often cited as the pivotal moment that knit Norway into a single realm. He did not just defeat his rivals, he systematically dismantled their power base, demanding taxes and oaths of allegiance that flowed directly to him. This was a quiet revolution, the consolidation of authority that made the old, freelance Viking lifestyle increasingly difficult. A king's law left little room for a jarl's private army to sail off on a summer raid without royal permission. The most potent symbol of this transformation stands in a churchyard in Jelling, Denmark. The massive runestone raised by King Harald Bluetooth is a masterpiece of political propaganda carved in stone. Its runic inscription makes a breathtaking claim that Harald won for himself all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian. In just a few lines, He Chinese letter together territorial conquest, royal authority, and religious conversion, the three pillars of the new state. This was the final, decisive blow to the old order. Christianity, with its hierarchical church structure and its doctrine of a single, all-powerful God, provided the perfect ideological framework for a single, all-powerful king. It offered a way to override the local pagan cults that were tied to individual chieftains, redirecting spiritual loyalty to a faith that supported the crown. The age of the independent Viking warband, the very engine of expansion for over 300 years, was drawing to a final close, not with a sudden collapse, but with the slow, steady imposition of royal administration, taxation, and law. The sea roads that had once been highways for free enterprise were becoming the regulated borders of kingdoms. The journey from the Baltic's chill to the Bosporus's warmth was a path walked by thousands of ambitious Norse warriors. For a Swedish fighter, the call of the Varangian Guard offered more than adventure. It was a direct route to prestige and power in the greatest city on earth, Constantinople. The Byzantine emperors, wary of the shifting loyalties within their own court, sought an elite force of unshakable fidelity. They found it in the Northmen, men whose culture prized sworn oaths above all else. These foreign warriors were formed into the emperor's personal bodyguard, a unit famed for its ferocity and its signature weapon, the massive Daneaxe. A primary source, the Alexiad, paints a vivid picture of their role, describing them as the emperor's axe-bearing guards, unwavering in their loyalty and terrifying in their execution of his orders. Their service was not just about brute force, it was a highly respected career. A tour of duty in the Guard was a proven way for a man of modest birth to return to Scandinavia a wealthy lord, his chests heavy with Byzantine gold and silks. his mind expanded by the wonders of a civilization far more ancient and sophisticated than his own. The most spectacular example of this path is Harald Hardrada, the future king of Norway. He served with distinction in the Guard, amassing a fortune and a reputation for ruthless brilliance that he would later bring to his failed attempt to claim the English throne in 1066. The Varangian Guard stands as a stunning symbol of Norse integration into the global landscape. It was not a clash of cultures, but a strategic alliance that linked the fjords of Scandinavia directly to the glittering heart of the Mediterranean world, proving their influence stretched from the edge of the known American wilderness to the very throne of the Roman emperor in the east. A dragon ship returning to a Norwegian fjord in the year 1100 would find a world its captain no longer recognized. The Viking Age did not end with a single dramatic collapse, but faded like a longship vanishing into a sea fog, its demise driven by a world that had finally learned to fight back and organize itself against the old ways. The very success of their expansion had forged the kingdoms that would end their era of free enterprise. Across Europe, weak, fractured realms had given way to powerful, centralized monarchies. In England, a strong royal authority now coordinated coast guards and fortified towns. In Francia, the Capetian kings built a network of castles that made river raids a suicidal gamble. A Viking fleet could no longer surprise our undefended coast because every coast was now defended. The economic incentives that fueled the raids were also drying up. The widespread conversion to Christianity across Scandinavia had removed a key ideological justification for attacking wealthy monasteries. How could you plunder the house of your own god? More practically, the immense flow of silver from the Islamic world, which had fueled the northern economy for centuries, began to slow to a trickle as mines were exhausted and trade routes shifted. The great Durham hoards buried across Scandinavia tell this story, their numbers dwindling as the 11th century wore on. Even the Vikings' greatest tactical advantages were being systematically neutralized. From the Thames to the Seine, European engineers built fortified bridges that acted as choke points, blocking the sleek longships from sailing deep into the heart of a kingdom. Kings now maintained standing armies of professional housecarls who could respond to an incursion with a speed and discipline that local militias never possessed. The longship itself, that masterpiece of naval engineering, was becoming obsolete in pitched naval battles. It was designed for speed and raiding, not for trading broadsides with the new, higher-sided cog warships that could rain missiles down upon its low, open deck. The world was simply closing. The open sea roads that had been highways for independent warbands were becoming the regulated borders of Christendom, a network of kingdoms where the old gods held no sway and the freebooting spirit had no place. The age of expansion was over, but in its wake lay a transformed world, its foundations permanently altered by the people from the north. A single silver coin, tarnished and bent, tells a story that 1,000 sagas cannot. This is the power of the spade over the pen, the tangible proof that archaeology offers, digging past the legends to uncover the gritty reality of Viking life. Spectacular discoveries like the Oseberg and Gokstad ship burials in Norway did more than just reveal beautiful ships, they were frozen moments of time. The Oseberg ship, a magnificent vessel itself, was a floating court buried with 2 women of immense status alongside sledges, a wagon, and exquisitely carved animal head posts. This was not just a burial, it was a statement of power, technology, and artistry, all preserved in clay for over 1,000 years. Far from the fjords, in the heart of the Danelaw, the Coppergate excavation in York did something equally magical. It resurrected an entire Viking Age neighborhood. Here, archaeologists did not just find objects, they found lives. They uncovered wood-paved streets, workshops of coppersmiths and comb makers, and the very homes of the people who made Jorvik a thriving cosmopolitan center. You can walk those streets today and feel the presence of that bustling, muddy, vibrant town. Further east, at sites like Staraya Ladoga in Russia, the earth reveals the humble beginnings of the Rus. The earliest layers show a simple, multi-ethnic trading post, with evidence of Norse, Slavic, and Finnish inhabitants living and working side by side, a far cry from the later grand palaces of Kiev, but the essential seed from which they grew. Perhaps the most silent yet eloquent witnesses are the great silver hoards. The Cuerdale hoard in England, a chest containing over 8,600 items, including coins, jewelry, and ingots, was a fortune buried and never recovered. Its composition is a map of Viking trade, with coins from as far as Samarkand and Baghdad mixed with hack silver from Ireland. Similarly, the Spillings hoard on the Swedish island of Gotland, the largest Viking silver hoard ever found, represents the colossal profits of the eastern trade routes, wealth that flowed back to the homeland and changed it forever. Every artifact, from a simple antler comb carved by a restless hand to the massive geometric fortresses like Trelleborg in Denmark, forces us to constantly revise our understanding. They were not just raiders but urban planners, not just warriors but meticulous craftsmen. Each fragment of pottery, each piece of worked bone, adds another voice to the chorus, building a picture far richer and more human than the myths alone could ever provide. That enduring image of the horn-helmeted barbarian, an axe in one hand and a torch in the other, is a caricature painted not by history but by the 19th century. It was a romantic opera costume, a dramatic fiction that has stubbornly overshadowed the truth for generations. Modern archaeology and historical research have systematically dismantled this one-dimensional villain. To see them only as raiders is to look at a tapestry from only an inch away, seeing only a few dark threads while missing the entire, breathtaking picture. Yes, violence was a tool in their kit, a brutal and effective one, but it was never the sum of their ambition. The fuller portrait reveals them as intrepid explorers who dared to sail into the grey Atlantic void, master merchants whose trade routes connected continents, and shrewd diplomats who could sit at a table with kings to negotiate treaties like the one that created Normandy. They were the settlers who turned the wilds of Iceland into a functioning republic, the poets who composed intricate verses, and the artists who carved stories of cosmic struggle into everyday objects. This reassessment is not an attempt to whitewash the sack of monasteries or the horrors of the slave trade. It is instead an effort to place those acts within their proper, complex context. They were a people of profound contradictions, capable of both creating a sophisticated legal assembly in one land and unleashing a great heathen army in another. Their legacy is therefore deeply contested, a story that changes entirely depending on whether you stand on the coast of Ireland, in the fields of the Danelaw, or by the riverbanks of Russia. It is this very complexity, this refusal to be easily categorized, that makes their 300-year journey across the medieval world so endlessly compelling. The true measure of their journey is not found buried in the earth, but living in our daily lives. The genetic map of Europe tells a story of settlement, with distinct Viking ancestry woven into the populations of Britain, Ireland, and as far as the islands of Sicily, a permanent biological echo of their travels. This legacy is etched even more clearly onto our maps. The Norse language permanently branded the landscapes they touched, from the By and Thorpe villages of the English Danelaw to the Kirkja names of Orkney and the fjord and home suffixes scattered across the North Atlantic. But their most intimate bequest is the very language we are speaking now. Common English words like sky, skin, egg, knife, window, and law are all loans from Old Norse, a testament to the deep, everyday integration of two cultures living side by side. Their political innovation also endures in the world's oldest continuous parliaments, Iceland's Althing, founded in the open air at Thingvellir, and the Tynwald on the Isle of Man, both trace their lineage directly back to the Viking tradition of the Thing, where free men gathered to debate and decide their collective fate. This is not a fossilized tradition, but a living democratic practice that has survived for over 1,000 years. In our modern imagination, their spirit is constantly reborn. The gods of Asgard command the box office in the Marvel universe, while epic television dramas bring the sagas of Ragnar Lothbrok and his sons into our living rooms. These stories, while heavily romanticized, prove our enduring fascination with their world of exploration, honor, and stark choices. For the modern nations of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, the Vikings are a foundational symbol of national identity, representing a heritage of resilience, seafaring prowess, and a daring to venture into the unknown. On a global scale, their expansion stands as a powerful early case study in globalization. They created a network that connected the walrus ivory of Greenland to the silver of Baghdad, demonstrating how the movement of people, goods, and ideas can irrevocably reshape whole continents. Their entire story, from the first raid to their final integration, compels us to ask difficult, timeless questions. What does it mean to belong to a place? How do cultures clash, merge, and create something new? And what drives humanity to constantly look beyond the horizon, risking everything for the chance of a new beginning? The Viking expansion was not a single event, but a seismic shift in the medieval world, a multi-pronged phenomenon that reshaped continents through exploration, warfare, trade, and cultural exchange. We have followed their dragon-prowed ships from the initial shock of raids on undefended monasteries to the establishment of permanent settlements in the icy landscapes of Greenland and the wooded shores of North America. We have walked with them through the bustling marketplaces of Baghdad and stood beside them in the glittering halls of Constantinople as imperial guards. This journey reveals a crucial truth. They were never a single, monolithic force of destruction. They were a diverse collection of farmers, merchants, explorers, and crafters, their collective actions accelerating the interconnectedness of the entire medieval world. Their legacy is a complex tapestry, its threads woven from both conflict and cooperation, from the destruction of the great heathen army and the creative founding of urban centers like Dublin. At its heart, the Viking story is a profoundly human one, a relentless search for resources, for status, and for a place to call home in a vast and challenging world. The historian Gwyn Jones captured this paradox perfectly when he wrote that the Viking spirit was a strange blend of cruelty and curiosity, of greed and courage. If this journey into their world has captivated your imagination, the adventure does not have to end here. We encourage you to delve deeper, to explore the archaeological sites and sagas for yourself, and to share your own perspective on their enduring and complex legacy in the comments.